I've discovered just over the last few years the value of simply thinking about something that I want, a desire that I have, closing my eyes, and think about what would the picture be like in my mind if everything were perfect. What are all the different distinctions that would have to have in order to have the result be absolutely perfect?
All right, well, here we go again. Cliff, thanks for being here.
You're welcome. Welcome. Um, the subject matter that I want to talk about today is a problem. If you have a problem and you recognize you have a problem, that is the problem. That's the first part of the problem. Whenever we have a problem, we tend to move away from it. It's a pain in the ass. You just
Right.
don't want to deal with it.
Right.
So you tend to move away from it. And then there's a lot of times the problem will keep on coming up and you start to worry about it. And all of those things are examples of moving away from the subject matter completely. What you have to do is recognize that it could be an opportunity, and it may just be a puzzle. But both puzzles and opportunities are something that you can do something about.
Right.
And the first thing that needs to happen is that you go into a neutral space. Boy, if you're depressed, it's really difficult to get your mind wrapped around anything positive at all. And one of the ways that I've discovered that you can eliminate depression in a very short order is to just stand up. Because most of the time, whenever we're depressed, we sit in a slouch position. We drop our shoulders, and it pushes all the brain from our oxygen, or all the oxygen from our brain down into our body and especially into our guts in order to preserve life.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing you have to do is change your physiology. And one of the ways to do that is to just stand up and pull yourself to your full height plus a half an inch. And in doing that, lift your chin up a little bit above normal and put a smile on your face, and then breathe through the upper part of your lungs. That'll flood your brain with oxygen. And you cannot be depressed if your brain is flooded with oxygen.
Right.
So that's a way, if you can remember, whenever you go into it, or you have somebody that you trust that could tell you, you seem to be depressed, change your physiology.
Right.
And then I've discovered that if you look at a problem really realistically and start to study all the different aspects of it, it's kind of like a puzzle. It's like the proverbial combination lock. There's certain pieces of information that you have to have, and it has to be dealt with in a certain order.
Right, which is why we call math problems problems.
Right. Right. It's just a thing moving in a certain order. It's not a problem to anyone who understands math and understands basic math. They can work their way through it.
Right.
So it's not the kind of problem that we have whenever you don't have a clue of where to go next and how to deal with the thing.
Well, that's one thing I found is the sort of problems we have are just like the goals we have. We think they're within our sphere of influence. And by that I mean, say, solving the homeless crisis. That's not even in my wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a problem I'm not even going to think about being able to solve or not. I'm not in a position to do anything.
Right. It's not within your circle of influence. It may be within your circle of concern,
Right.
but there's all kinds of things within our circle of concern that we just can't get to yet.
Right. And that is also the same thing with goals we have, where I found through personal experience, sometimes the way I paralyze myself and have the excuse to procrastinate is by finding a problem that I believe is unsolvable and then pointing to that to excuse my own lack of ability.
Right.
And that's one of the things behind the idea of God isn't going to give you a problem that you can't handle, which for me translates to I'm not even going to accept a thing as a problem for me unless it's somewhere within my scope.
Right.
Just like I'm not going to accept a goal if I don't see it as within my scope. It may be at the edge of my abilities, at the edge of my believed, perceived competence, but it's within reach.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think about things and concern ourselves with things that we don't think are within reach.
Right.
And when it comes to the depression and having a problem, that's one thing I've seen and experienced personally and with friends, is that when they're depressed, to tell them a simple step they can take to go in the right direction, they'll then start to make all of the excuses of, yeah, but there's still all this, and, I lost my mom 6 months ago, or, I got divorced this year, and, I don't know what to do with my kids and how to spend more time with them because of that. And it's like, wait, we're not talking about that right now.
Mm-hmm.
The problem right now is you feel like dog shit.
Right.
How about we take care of that and then we move on? Yeah, and some people are just inclined to do that because they want to wallow.
Yeah, and that's a sure sign of depression. If they are telling you that they have a problem and they're trying to explain this problem to you, and they're not willing to take your suggestions or even change your physiology, there's nothing you can do to help them.
Right.
They'll have to go, and they change your physiology when they go to bed. And hopefully the next morning, it won't be as big of a problem to them, or something like that. And a lot of people say they'll express a problem, and that they're trying to figure out a solution for it. And if you like them, it's common to give them suggestions. But boy, if they start rejecting your suggestions, there's no sense in even talking to them.
And that's one of the nice things, though, is that sometimes the solution is really simple, and we as a species tend to enjoy overcomplication. But there's a story, I think it's of Elijah, where Elijah talks to God and says, you know what? I feel so bad, and life is awful, and life is horrible, and why do you give me all of these trials, and blah, blah, blah. And God goes, well, did you try to eat and drink today and take a nap?
Yeah.
So Elijah went, ate and drank, and took a nap, and, when he woke up, he was a new man.
Yeah.
It's like, sometimes it's really that easy. It's not God's fault. It's not the world that is picking on you. Perhaps you're dehydrated, having a low blood sugar crash, so you need to drink some water, have a piece of fruit, eat some protein, and take a nap.
Right.
Because you just got 3 hours sleep last night.
Right. Right.
sometimes it is that, and I think even it was
Yeah.
Jim Carrey who said, uh, "Sure, depression is a real thing, but exercise, eat right, drink water, leave alcohol alone for a while." Yes, it is a problem, but you have to give yourself a fighting chance.
You're right.
It's and don't don't like underestimate the power of a nap and some water.
Hmm. Well, and one of the things that I believe can help immensely is just simply closing your eyes whenever you're not having a problem. You just life's going along, everything is wonderful. Just stop and close your eyes for a minute and imagine yourself being able to look at every potential problem as a puzzle and notice how you feel whenever you can make that puzzle come together in the correct order that it needs to be in order to uh, make the puzzle into a picture.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that strength, you start to develop the idea within yourself that you don't have problems, you have puzzles. And just the idea of a puzzle has an entirely different emotion to it than the word problem.
Right. That was one of the things I said to a guest yesterday at Toastmasters, is that Toastmasters hasn't just helped how I talk my to the people I know in business, but also my parents and my own self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing how to be more clear and concise with myself instead of just chasing off on random tangents,
Oh, yeah.
and being able to do that. There's a thing I've heard a few times since I was a kid was, words are magic, and that's why we call it spelling
Mm-hmm.
when we write.
Yeah.
And knowing how we relate to the words that we choose to use. Because there are some people where the way that they get up and going is they just remind themselves, if you don't do this, you're going to fail and you're going to be pathetic. And it gets them up and going. And for some people, words like that are just crippling.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about how
Mm-hmm.
they relate to it.
Right. Right. I think one of the big things that I've learned over the years is the value of having a mentor.
Mm.
And you may not even know the mentor personally. Uh, there are people who, whenever you watch them on television or wherever you see them, uh, that you like them. I mean, you like their style. You like the way they talk, the way they respond.
Right.
And that person can become a mentor for you, but instead of just looking at them, and saying, "Oh, I like that person," study particular habits that they have.
One of the one of my mentors when I was a kid was Austin Powers, played by Michael Myers. And I don't know if that was a good thing, but it was he and Jim Carrey, the way that they could artfully communicate so much without using words,
Uh huh.
or they could use words in a way that were so effective or had so much weight just by the way they could change the tone and the inflection and what they did while they were speaking. They had such command of every aspect of what they were portraying
Mm-hmm.
that I just thought that was amazing.
Right.
For me it was a peak art form because it was theater, they're acting,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to control every aspect of communication on such a broad range, that just blew my mind. I thought that was cool
Right.
because I knew that was powerful just because of the way it could make people feel.
Sure.
And being able to observe that, I had no idea what an impact it had until I watched the Austin Powers with a girlfriend. It was her first time to watch them, and I was 21 years old. And through each one of the movies, she just kept staring at me. And it had been 6 years since I'd watched them. And I was like, oh, I thought I was a unique person. And apparently I just borrowed the personality from Austin Powers.
Yeah.
And, so for just better or worse, that's what occurred. And we do that if we think about it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we perceive a lot of things we get from the people in our lives growing up.
Right.
For better or for worse. And it is either aligned with that or it's completely opposed to that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, all depending on how we relate to it.
Right.
So, one of the things with a problem that I was taught when I was a kid was growing up speaking German, the word for a math problem, the word they use actually translates to task. It's a math task. It's just a task. It's an Aufgabe. And no implication of problem.
Right.
In that sense. And the way that I was always... Because words were a very big deal in the household growing up. And we were discouraged from saying, I have a problem. We were encouraged to say, we have an opportunity to learn. Because that's even what a math problem is.
Right, sure.
It's an opportunity. It is an opportunity to apply what we've learned and to learn more through practice and exercise
Mm-hmm.
in order to personally advance ourselves.
Right.
And when I got sick around New Year's, and then I talked to one of my friends and mentors about it, and how about my mom got sick too, and it's the first time she's been sick like this in decades. And the way he phrased things, you got sick, you caught it, this or that, both of you did. And I said, well, we don't see it as we got sick, because symptoms are not symptoms of illness, they're symptoms of healing. So you actually want to encourage the symptoms because that is what signifies healing. You're not contagious when you have symptoms. You're contagious in the 3 days before the symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
when your system hasn't fully kicked in yet to fight the issue. So once you're flushing out, you're coughing, hacking, doing all of that, once your lymph nodes are inflamed and your throat's sore and all of that, your body is fully kicked in and engaged, and it's now flushing all of that out. And when we would have a fever, Ma would make sure we had socks on, full clothes, and beneath blankets and just sweat it out. And Ma never took our temperature
Mm-hmm.
growing up. And the whole idea was the fever, you want to encourage that and help the body do it, because the body will regulate and do what it needs to do to burn it off. And the more warm you stay, it's not going to spike your temperature, it's going to help it maintain, and it'll help you because your body doesn't need to work as much to maintain the temperature.
Right.
And so I'm talking to Troy about all of this and said, I didn't have a sickness, I had a healing crisis perhaps, but I don't get sick when I'm working 14-hour days.
Right.
I get sick when I have time off and my body goes, okay, now's a good time to dump.
Right.
And away it goes.
Yep.
And for just whatever reason, girls sync up with their periods. We sync up with people close to us. And, Ma got, quote unquote, the same thing I got.
Mm-hmm.
Flushed and purged, so, but no one else around us did.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, germ theory, sure. But at the same time, it was the perspective of, instead of me going, oh, woe is me,
Mm-hmm.
life sucks because I got sick, it was instead, e, e, even in a fevered state for 5 days, I could think about, I'm so glad my body knows what to do to heal.
Right.
I'm so glad I'm so glad I have a chance right now to go through this because I'm missing 2 weeks of work
Yeah.
and I can still make rent. I'm so glad my body chose the right time to do it. It's those, just that difference in perspective. It's nice to not suffer.
Right.
And it's nice to not suffer more than you absolutely have to.
Right.
So just those basic perspectives of how we relate to normal things that occur.
Yeah.
I just don't
Yeah.
like to
Yeah.
suffer.
Yeah. Pain is physical, suffering is mental.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah. Whenever I seldom ever get sick, but I don't know. It was probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago that I I had symptoms of a cold and chills and fever and that sort of stuff. And what I've learned to do is to fill the tub up with as hot a water as you can stand. Get into the tub and slouch down, get your whole body under the water, except for your face, obviously. And while you're in that position, sweating, take a good double header of whiskey. And boy, I'll tell you what, you'll start to sweat like you can't believe. And you'll come out of that tub a half an hour later, and you're just so exhausted that all you want to do is lay down and sleep, and next day you're good.
That helps. My my mom and clients of hers have been doing zitz baths. It's where they sit in the bath just up above their waist with their knees up or down. And uh, there are even antique zitz baths that one can find. They look like a big sink, but they're built like a chair, so your butt's down in. So it submerges your rectum and your just your genitals, and then your legs and knees are up and out, and you're just
Right.
up to there, and it's a way to purge all of the toxins because of where all of the things sweat and just things come down there, and it helps loosen the
Oh,
bowels and
yeah.
do all of that. And plus, that's the position we used to be in when we would squat before we had the toilets,
Mm-hmm.
and still use them in a lot of words part of the world where it's just a hole in the ground you squat. And so that's been a big thing. So Ma was doing stuff like that when she got sick, and I took baths as well. It was just being able to focus on my body is going through a healing process. It's not diseased.
Right.
It's not like I have a pestilence. It's just I feel awful, and that's the way it is. But that's because my body's doing what it has to do, and I'm so glad it is.
Right.
Being able to be a little bit grateful in a space like that, it can just make all the difference in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to the problem, I've seen people do that, and I've seen my own self do it, which is why I can recognize it in other people, is when I share an idea with myself of, oh, well, if I just did this or I could do this, the part of me that's preoccupied with maintaining the status quo will then throw out a giant thing and say, well, you can't achieve that, though. You can't do that with just the power of your mind or your thoughts. You can't do that. So that means all the rest of this is bullshit too. No, no, and it's where a lot of people then skip that part where it was talked lot about. Where I recall it the most was with The Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, is where if you can think it, conceive it, and believe it, you can achieve it. So why would I think about a thing that I can't believe in? I can't even really conceptualize it. I can't believe in it. I have no faith that I can achieve it. I have no belief in it. Okay, I'm not going to focus on that then.
Mm-hmm.
That's not in my wheelhouse. But I can focus on this. Bring it back to where it's a point of where, okay, that is desirable to me. I do desire that. And I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't know in what way, but I can do that. I can conceive it, I can visualize it, I can believe it, I can picture it and internalize it. Then okay, we can go for that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's once I began to recognize and actually know it, not just have it as a intellectual concept of I'm not fighting against myself.
Mm-hmm.
The ego, and a lot of people relate to that term in a myriad of ways too. They think of it as a lot of things, but all the ego is our projected sense of self.
Right.
It's who we externalize and believe and perceive ourselves to be.
Yeah.
So, and the ego, that process seeks to maintain itself.
Yeah, it's a protection mechanism.
Right. And it is concerned with maintaining the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
And with either too much success or too much loss, too much gain or too much loss, too much pleasure or too much pain, it shirks from that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, it's, so when people talk about how they feel at war with themselves, they know that they get in their own way, all of that thing. It's just a natural process of the ego trying to maintain the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just if we can recognize that and go, okay, how can I work with myself then to change the paradigm, change my thoughts, what is within my realm that I think is possible, and then go towards that. Because once that becomes the new norm, then the ego will adjust with that.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like I was so accustomed to being in the shit boxes I would drive that being in someone else's new car would sometimes be uncomfortable because it was unfamiliar.
Right.
And when I lived with you 12 years ago, and I was talking about a new vehicle, and you said, go put on a suit and go and test drive a nice car. And I did. I went and test drove, I think, 2 or 3 of them. And I was wearing my suit and did all that. And then when I would drive my shitbox after that, I could imagine what it was like to drive a nice car. Because I'd had that experience, and I felt a desire towards that. And then when I began buying new vehicles, it was like, oh yeah, I know this feeling.
Right.
This feels right. I know what it's like. And that, I think, is one of the big parts of the visualizing that we do in order to achieve our goals is we become familiar with something. We become familiar with how would I feel? How would I look? How does a person who does these things behave?
Right.
We see enough people who have what we want, or if it's position, status, or wealth, to know how they carry themselves, how it is they talk. And even with Toastmasters, looking at people who are good speakers, seeing how they behave, and we can imagine it in our heads. How does a person who's capable and relaxed and competent in a public speaking situation, how do they behave? And we know how.
Oh yeah.
So if we don't have the practice in Toastmasters, or we don't do it each day, we can still visualize it each day.
Yeah. Yeah. I've discovered just over the last few years the value of simply thinking about something that I want, a desire that I have, closing my eyes, and think about what would the picture be like in my mind if everything were perfect. What are all the different distinctions that I would have to have in order to have the result be absolutely perfect? And in doing that exercise, you start building new circuits in the brain.
Hmm.
And pretty soon, if you do it often enough, you can close your eyes and actually see and feel and touch the object with your mind and how you feel now that you've obtained it and that sort of thing. And then give thanks for that. And every once in a while, just go in and touch base with it. Yeah, that's the way it'll be like. That's the way it is in its growth, and it's coming toward you. And then one day, it happens.
Right.
And it has amazed me at how many times I had projects, and they all had to do with money. It was going to cost money to do the project and everything. And I would imagine that the project was finished and everything. I would take some steps in order to get a better idea of what the total cost would be in the process. And then once I understood what the total cost would be, imagine myself having it. And then all of a sudden one day it happened, and I know all the steps that I took that had to happen in order for that to happen. But they happened so naturally.
Right.
And the big thing that I recognized after a time was I have no idea where the money came from. I mean, it obviously came.
Right. Right.
But I couldn't remember where it came from because I didn't strive to make it.
Right. And that's one thing that I found, and I've had to do it for myself, is recognizing that if you're trying to manifest, create, and you forget to do it, you don't do it, 2 or 3 days go by, and it's like, oh, I've not done that in 2 or 3 days. I should do that. Maybe you don't want it badly enough.
Yeah. Or it's a matter of you don't feel yourself worthy to have it.
Right. Right. It's one or both.
Yeah.
And it's typically
one or both.
One or both. and that's been one of those things for me where just recognizing and accepting that there's a time and a season. The first time I picked up Think and Grow Rich, I bought that when I was like 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Tried 3 times to read it, didn't get past the second chapter throughout all my teenage years. And then I at last read it when I was 22, 23. Breezed through it in 2 or 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
Made the most sense to me in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But when it really clicked with me was the second time I read it.
Right.
And when I was like 24, 25, within a year or two of when I first read it. And there are a lot of things like that where sometimes you're just not there yet. And that's fine. It's where for me, there have been some things where I've known about them since I was a kid. Some ideas, concepts, uh, beliefs that were not completely internalized. And there aren't, it's not until I've experienced some things and gone through some things where it's, oh, now it all makes sense to me, and then I enjoy the material or the process or just whatever it is. It's like I told you today at breakfast. You know, I couldn't relate to my mom when she would exclaim about how grateful she is. She has a husband who doesn't mind leftovers. For me, it's just like, well, duh, of course he would. It's good food. You're a good cook.
Right.
Leftovers are great. Who doesn't love leftovers? It's amazing. But it was not until a few years ago where she could say that. I go, oh, yeah, that's great. Because I had a girlfriend where I'd make a great meal. And then if she spent a weekend with me the next day, we can't eat the leftovers because she's not in the mood for leftovers. Like, but it's delicious. So now I have to cook another meal at my house
Right.
just because you can't enjoy
Yeah.
pasta 2 days in a row.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's one of those things that we get used to as a child. I mean, leftovers at my place were, a standard thing because my mother always prepared way more than what we needed.
Right.
And you'd end up with a couple leftovers, and 1 or 2 days a week, like Wednesdays and Sundays or whatever, we would have all the leftovers, and she would, make up a decent meal
Mm-hmm.
out of leftovers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it was always fine with me, and I know I have different friends that they don't eat leftovers. They never have. They don't like the taste of them or the idea of them or something. But it's just a preference, It's just something that we make ourselves accustomed to.
Right. Right. My main, and that's all very true. And my main point with that was I couldn't relate to my ma in this way until I was in my late 20s, just because I didn't have the experience to appreciate what she was expressing.
Right.
And that's the same thing as with my mom going on about how grateful she is to her husband to have book for 8 years that each person in the world that I've talked to about personal development has told me I should read. It is a staple. And I don't read it for 8 years, despite the fact that I tried a few times. I just wasn't there yet.
Right.
And there are times where I just have to remind myself, if you're not there yet, you're not there yet. So find some step and process before, because there were a lot of other books that I read before that, like The Richest Man in Babylon. How I had read parts of how to make friends and influence people. I had read Psycho-Cybernetics. I had read other books that helped me get a basis in order to appreciate Think and Grow Rich.
Mm-hmm.
And some folks, like what you had done, you read that book, and that may have been the first book on that subject you read, and it made perfect sense to you.
Yeah. Well, and it made enough sense, and of course I was 23 years old, so it made enough sense to me that it's what caused me to move to Idaho.
Right.
Which was the greatest thing I've ever done. And of course it's not only affected my life, it's given me a wonderful life.
Right. Right.
Yeah. One of the things that I only discovered just within the last couple of years is there was a guy by the name of Bob Proctor that lived in Canada, and he was introduced to Think and Grow Rich. I'm gonna say like 50 years ago. So you know, it would have been close to the same time that I read it. But the guy that gave that book to him gave him a hardbound copy of it, and he said, I want you to read this book, and then I want you to study it. I want you to take this book and read something out of it, a page or two, every day of your life. And Bob started to do that. And he still had the original book. It was all had rubber bands together, you know, on it to hold pieces together and all that sort of thing. But he had a little stand that was made out of wood, and it would hold the book open to a page, and then, you know, you could turn pages, but it was always sitting right there on his desk.
Mm.
So every time he had a few minutes, he would read the pages and that stuff. And I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands of times that he had read that book. And it became so important to him. He had made a lot of money just cleaning floors. That was his first business, was to clean floors. And it only took him a couple of years to get up into the millions of dollars cleaning floors. And he was cleaning floors in Canada, the United States, England, Germany. I mean, he was all over the place with cleaning outfits, cleaning floors. And then one day he was having a meeting with his staff, and he was saying how impressed he was by, what was the name of the outfit? Earl Nightingale Conant.
Mm.
How impressed he was with Nightingale Conant and the tapes that they brought out and that stuff, and how he would just love to meet Earl Nightingale. And one of the guys in his crew said, "No, no, you don't." He says, what do you mean I don't?" He said, "If you wanted to meet him, you'd go meet him.
Right.
You'd figure out a way to go meet him." And he thought, that's right. So he ended up not only, you know, flying to wherever Earl was, and set up a meeting and flew over and met him. And he said he realized within 15 minutes that he had to go work for Earl. That became his, and he sold all of his cleaning businesses and that stuff. And for 2 years, he worked for Earl Nightingale on a commission-only basis. And then they ended up kind of going into a partnership for a while. They were training and that kind of stuff. And then Earl was getting older, and Bob wanted to go his own way, so they amicably split up and kept going. And then he met an attorney by the name of Gallagher, and she took his course and everything, and they decided to make a business out of this. And he decided to make it as big as he could. And he just died about a year ago.
Right.
And I think he was 89 years old whenever he died. But 2023, his company sold $1 billion worth of product on doing well.